Hi. So I'm posting two other videos this week that I actually made for another class, but which deal with entirely what we're talking about this week. So I'm double dutying them. The first is a review of Soviet and post-Soviet history. I mentioned some of this last week, but it also talks about the post-Soviet period and Boris Yeltsin and so forth. And Glasnost that Tolstaya and Petrushevskaya are working through. So you might want to take a look at that. The other one is actually, you should definitely take a look at. It's about women's writing and Petrushevskaya. In the fairy tales class, we read a different Petrushevskaya story, and I sort of walk the class through that. But I think that one, the information on women's writing generally, the notion of beat and bitia, and two, the discussion of Petrushevskaya per se, is more than enough fodder for you to kind of think through the story that we were assigned in this class. So there's that. So in this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Tolstaya. It is that Tolstoy. She is like his great grandniece or something. And she, in the other video, I talk about the idea of women's writing starting up in Glasnost, sort of women getting together to self-publish when there's greater freedom, but they still lack access because of institutionalized sexism to what is at the time still the state publishing industry. She's part of that cohort. So we have Tolstaya, Ulitskaya, Petrushevskaya, Sidor. There's a whole group of women who are, they're born and raised under stagnation. They begin as writers during that period, and throughout the 80s, Glasnost is an opportunity for them. And then, their careers are sort of free throughout the post-Soviet period to flourish as they may. In the history vid, I do talk about how that post-Soviet period, at least throughout the 90s, is chaotic and scarce and dreadful. And you really see that come out for us this week in the Petrushevskaya story, the one I talk about in that video, and then also in ours, right? We have this scarcity of everything, scarcity of space, scarcity of goods, scarcity of compassion, scarcity of relationships, scarcity of everything, right? And that's very much along the lines of Petrushevskaya. Tolstaya is a different vibe entirely. You can see that stylistically she's very different than Petrushevskaya, who has this very almost abstract style of writing. It's almost like a fairy tale, this very straightforward, simple, or at least it looks straightforward and simple. And one of the things to think about in the Petrushevskaya story is the fact that the simplicity of the writing style itself might distract the reader into thinking that they understand what's going on until you kind of get to the end and you realize you didn't understand what was going on, and that was probably a little deliberate on Petrushevskaya's part, right? It's a deliberate deception. Tolstaya's writing, I love this story. I have to say, I think the writing is opulent and amazing. I'd say one thing, obviously, that strikes out, or that sticks out right away, is the point of view, which, of course, then is tied very much to the voice. We have this point of view from the author themselves, it seems, that then just moves right in to little Petch's point of view, right? So even on that first page, go down, buttery Atlantis. No one can save you, right? I mean, we just move in and out of this objective perception, but then also this child's perception. And then sometimes also is the second person, Uncle Boria, we don't like him. We, creating this world in which we, the reader, and she, the author, and Petra, the character, all of our points of view are just blended into one, so that we, in a sense, are really immersed in and experiencing, sometimes with a little bit of vertigo even, experiencing Petcha's experiences, right? And they're fantastical. She draws in a lot of Russian folklore, honestly. I mean, one thing that's interesting is that both of our women writers really draw on Russian folk traditions, although, with sort of updates to style and intent and voice and things like that. But, one way you can approach Tolstoya's story is to think about it symbolically. We have so much symbolism of birds and eggs. There is the alkonost bird and the alkonost egg that Pecha receives. It means melancholy forever, but he doesn't know what that means, so he takes the egg. The Siren bird, the bird of death that strikes, or that stalks Grandpa, and also stalks Pecha a little bit. We have we hear that his little brother, younger than him, is like a little chicken egg sealed off from the soul, sealed off from the world. His soul's like a chicken egg. Everything just rolls right off of it. We have reference at the end to boiled eggs dripping from the trees, and that, egg back in his pocket radiating longing. I mean, I think one of the main themes of this story is this coming of age, right? This transition from childhood or to the beginning of adulthood. And, we see that the things, on one hand, we have his little brother still safe in childhood, right? Sort of like the little girl who is too young to drown, so she becomes a fish, right? This sort of magical, mystical world, this fairy tale world that is associated with childhood that Pecha is still in when we meet him. And we can tell that by the way he views the world, and how fascinated he is with his princess down the street, so to speak. But we also see that he's beginning to gain knowledge, right? He understands that Grandpa is dying. He understands that Uncle Borya is some part of the adult, mundane, terrible world that he doesn't quite understand almost why he doesn't like him, and he knows he doesn't like him. We have those government bills. He has nightmares about the adult world, boring, dead world of government bills and subways and, this commerce, right? He's sent to the store on an errand of commerce to get cigarettes for Uncle Borya, and we see a dead crow in the road. So no more magical, mystical bird, just dead, right? And later at the end of the story, crows fall dead from the trees, supposedly. Right, so there's this whole world of symbolism surrounding birds and eggs and this transition, and you can see how by the end of it, that chicken egg that Pecha's soul was protected by is shattered, right? By the knowledge of sex. And they're completely conflated, right? He finds Uncle Borya in bed with his beloved princess. And, what he actually yells out is Grandpa's dead. And so, I mean, if we think about it, this knowledge of sex and death is kind of what marks our entrance into the adult world, right? So this is a theme that's going on. And I'd say some fruitful topics for you to think about for journals this week is to try to parse through exactly the way that some of these fairy tale elements are working, right? The birds, the eggs, the other elements that come out of this folklore, and how they're tied maybe to that theme of childhood and coming out of childhood. We have a very interesting characterizations of the story. What happens when an adult doesn't fully come out of childhood, actually, right? Because there's this intimation, certainly at the end of the story, the author just steps in to directly address us, that this is an inevitability, is the whole dead world filled with dead things, the trauma of death and sex and betrayal, and how ugly and horrible the world is. That's it, child. It's all true. And he just picks himself up and dusts himself off and goes home. And there's a way in which, because this is an inevitability. We all do have to grow up. There's nothing for it. And if we don't grow up, if we are arrested, things don't turn out great there either, right? So, I mean, that's something to think about too. So I would say, thinking about the way that point of view works in a technical, formal sense would be a fruitful place to think about that, moving in and out between, the author's the author's third person point of view, Pecha's, inhabiting Pecha's first person point of view. It's never quite first person, but it's just his head. I said sometimes the audience is brought in when a second person. So examining in particular passages of that point of view and the voice that is involved in creating this sort of, almost like a group voice between the author and Pecha and us as well, I think is a very fruitful place to think about that theme of childhood transition into the beginnings of adulthood, the way the bird and the egg symbolism comes into, and there's other, there's the dragon, there's the lemon pit necklace, You know, there's the girl fish chomped between Boreas' teeth. There's a lot of those fairy tale elements that, you know, I think as symbols, you know, we don't talk too much about symbolism usually when we make formalist analyses, but, you know, it's like My First Goose. That goose is a symbol. It just is. And there's symbols in this. And you could easily, I think, devote some time to picking a few of them or a few related ones and sort of picking through those. So, yeah, that's what I would recommend. And this is a Glasnost era story, so we don't yet have the horror of the 1990s to think about. And I would also point out, just as a point of reference, the fact that they have this summer dacha is actually, I mean, that's sort of, it's you know, here the idea of having a summer home indicates that, you know, maybe these people are very wealthy or something, but that's not really the case in this cultural context. It's very common for sort of a middle class family to have a little, you know, cabin to get away during the summer. So just to sort of be clear about that. All right, well, I guess that's it. I feel like this video is short, but the other videos exist too, and I've already made so many videos today. So, anywho, stay safe, stay in your house, wash your hands. Good luck.